All right, guys, we're in the studio today. It's Monday, but hopefully you're excited like I am. We're talking to Physician on Fire, and as usual, we're talking about financial independence.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, Brad, we're back. And today we got Physician on Fire. He's going to be talking to us, obviously, about financial independence, but we're going to be dealing with this specific framework of the high-income professional in the context of financial independence. And I'm excited just to get a chance to go through the information that he's been creating over the last several years and explore what this particular framework actually looks like.
Yeah, agreed. This should be a good episode. Our good buddy Carl over 1500 Days was the one who hooked us up with Physician on Fire. And it's nice to meet another blogger, and especially someone who's focusing on high-income professionals. So I think that's a different perspective than many of the guests we've had on, and I think it'll really add to the audience. So yeah, very excited.
All right, POF, welcome to the studio. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here chatting with you.
I think the audience that you speak to with your blog is maybe different than the audience that Jacob from ERE speaks to, and I think that is awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not trying to show people how to live on less than $10,000 a year. You know, my budget's more of for us, maybe 60, 70, 80,000 a year, but I know my audience, they spend up to 200,000 or more. So I definitely have a slightly different perspective than some of the others.
I think it makes for a very interesting story because when you take someone that on an average day without any intentionality is spending close to $200,000 or $300,000 a year, and you start talking to them about the possibility of what a $60,000 or $70,000 a year lifestyle might look like, that's got to be an interesting conversation. I mean, that's one that I want to be a fly on the wall for.
Right. And I think it starts at, well, I couldn't. I said, well, you don't want to, or you're so used to what you're doing right now. But on the other hand, when you look at a little closer how we're spending our money, we've got certain ways that I say that we cheat, essentially, because I no longer have a mortgage payment. So I have a nice house, but it's paid off, and we have a little second home, and that's paid off too. I've paid off all my student loans. We no longer have term life insurance, no longer pay for disability, which is $300 to $500 a month for most physicians. You know, we do a little bit of travel hacking. Our kids are in public schools, and even our donation money, I track that separately because that comes from our donor advised fund, which is something I'm building up from our investments. So again, there are quite a few categories where we've just knocked that spending down to essentially zero.
So when you have the conversation with fellow physicians who are spending $200K plus a year, how does that go? What do you actually talk about as these are the first items to change? Does it even get down to change, or is it just here's what we're doing and it's going to enable us to X, Y, and Z, retire early or have financial independence, however you want to frame it? I'm just really curious what that conversation actually mechanically looks like.
Right. And I haven't had this conversation in person, in real life, too many times. Most of the talking I do is in the form of writing on my site. But I was talking with a friend of mine, and I kind of told him what our spending was. And he was like, wow. And I was like, well, yeah, there are certain things you can do. And where we live, you know, I'm kind of in a rural area in the upper Midwest, and there isn't as much pressure to spend a lot of money. The parking lot's not full of luxury autos, and we don't have competition for the best private schools because we only have a couple parochial schools. And so I think there's more pressure in bigger cities to be a bigger spender than there is where I'm at. But yeah, in real life, I haven't had that conversation too many times, and I don't think it would go that well, to be honest.
Well, it probably does help that in some cases, because you've created this platform, you're sharing your story, they're coming to you as opposed to you imposing your own belief system on somebody else. These are people that are looking for another way.
Right. I'm not going around proselytizing, trying to convince every surgeon I work with that they should start changing their ways, because frankly, frankly, I'm a live and let live kind of guy. Like, I'll do what I want to do, and you can do what you choose to do. But if you happen to, like you said, stumble upon my site and think, oh, well, that's interesting. That's something I hadn't really considered, this whole financial independence world.
I think it's such a cool picture that you get to create and that you get to talk about. I guess I have a toe in the world. I'm a pharmacist, so I understand, a little bit of y'all's framework. But in general, many of your peers or people that are coming after you are getting their first real job where they're not working for essentially minimum wage, especially when you put in all the hours they're putting in, but they're getting their first real job with, 16 plus years of training now, and they're coming out with $300,000 in student loan debt. And then they're making this incredible income potentially, but now they're in an extraordinarily high marginal tax bracket. And you have not only all the delayed gratification for the 16 years that you put in training, and now potentially you have 2 kids and you've been telling them, just hold on. I'm finally about to finish this fellowship. And now after all of that, you've finally gotten through it. The desire to just overcompensate for those last 16 years must be extraordinary. But then you're just getting penalized and crushed by the tax code. So physicians have these unique struggles and this kind of this unique framework that you have to work within. And I imagine the ability to resist overcompensating for the 16-year drought that you were in must be very intense.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, I was going to say some of the the high points, but you just nailed them all. It really is. You don't finish until you're usually in your early 30s for most of us, and that's if we didn't take any time off. And the debts are becoming just out of control. And then you've been, scrimping. And so there's kind of 2 sides to that coin as far as you get used to living on a lot less, not much more than minimum wage based on your hours. On one hand, people like me, for example, so used to quote unquote living like a resident, where you make, for me, it was 40,000. Now it's maybe closer to 50, 60 a year. It's a decent living, but it's just enough to live a normal middle class life. So if you can continue living that middle class lifestyle for just a little while, you can get way ahead, despite the tax code and the tax bracket you find yourself in. But on the other hand, so many of us had been waiting, and spouses have been waiting for that first big paycheck, that you're going to reward yourself. And, it's best to reward yourself with maybe a really nice vacation or a decent, reliable vehicle. But on the other hand, many physicians just spend the majority of that paycheck and don't even max out their available tax-deferred retirement investments, which is the first thing you really ought to be doing.
Just to dial in that a little bit more. So you graduate, or not just graduate, but now you finish your residency and your fellowship or whatever, that ended up looking like. And now you're making, $200,000 plus, but you've got $350,000 in student loan debt that have been accruing, interest essentially in the background this whole time. Maybe you had it on deferment, and you're in a now extremely high marginal tax bracket. That is a challenge, to pay down $300,000 in student loan debt. That's going to take some time, especially when the marginal tax bracket you're in is a 40% tax bracket. What does that look like practically for you guys?
If you really want to get rid of that debt, which I strongly suggest you really focus on, then you can't really do the big lifestyle upgrade or lifestyle inflation. Maybe increase your lifestyle by 50% in spending, but you want to put a lot of money towards those loans. There's a physician up in Alaska, and he's also a relatively new blogger, but he goes by Live Free MD, and he has a post about paying off $400,000 in debt, I think within 5 years. And it's because that was his goal. He said, I could stretch it out to 20 or 30 years like a mortgage, but I don't want that hanging over my head. So he just put most of his paychecks towards his loans until they were gone. And that's really, the best way to do it.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and just hop right into this. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your own personal path to financial independence?
Sure. It's kind of a long story, kind of a short story. I finished residency in 2006. And for the first couple of years, I did what's called locum tenens work, which is just a fancy Latin term for holding a place or working a temporary job. So I was an anesthesiologist for hire, working wherever there was a need, and I had a license and wanted to be. So for 2 years, my fiance and then wife, during that time we got married, traveled around, lived in half a dozen different states, and got to try a bunch of different practices. And we were living on the dimes of the hospitals and groups we worked for. So they'd put us up in apartments or hotel if it was a short period of time. And that way I was able to basically save every dollar I was paid. I had a per diem for food and I had lodging, and I was able to pay down my student loans while saving up for our future. And then basically almost everywhere I worked, there was a job opening and a job offer available to me. And one of those places happened to be very near to where my wife grew up. So I ended up taking a permanent job. I should put permanent in quotes. If you could see me, I'm doing that with my fingers, the thing. So I took a permanent job that lasted about 4 years. The hospital actually went bankrupt and shut its doors for a period of time, and I was let go during that downward spiral. But we had built a great big house on the water, 400,000 square feet, and it was our dream home, and we were going to be there for the 20 or 30 years I was planning to work. And of course, that all got blown up. So realized after that maybe we overspent on the home and did a little more locums work, and eventually ended up in another permanent job, which is the one I'm in, which is my last job. But all that time, I shouldn't say no, it's my last job. As far as I know, it'll be my last job. I plan to be here for at least another year or two, and then we'll see what happens. So after 10, 11 years of working, I had always been a natural saver, and I didn't know exactly what I was saving for, but I came across an article on Market Watch about this guy named Pete, who goes by a silly moniker of Mr. Money Mustache. And it talked about financial independence and what it meant and what the math was behind it and all of that. And I looked at my balances and kind of ran the numbers for myself and realized, and it was a shocker, but I realized I basically was financially independent after a decade of working as an anesthesiologist, and I hadn't really been saving for it. I had been saving, but I didn't know for what necessarily. But I did realize that if I really wanted to, I could retire at any point.
What's powerful about that to me is just by virtue of the fact that you have this massive income, if you just do just a couple things right at the beginning, the rest of it writes yourself. And the sad thing is how many, physicians I know, and the story is at the age of 60, they have nothing to show for it. Or at least they're still on the hamster wheel and they're having to work to 70. There's no real timeline for their retirement because they just didn't do a few of those things right at the beginning.
Right. I mean, you can't live paycheck to paycheck and ever hope to get ahead. And so even back in medical school, I remember playing with compound interest calculators and thinking, if I set aside $8,000 a month, and then after 30 years, I'd be worth $13 million or whatever it is, and I didn't know what I would do with $13 million or anything like that. But I've also realized I don't need $13 million. That's at least $10 million more than I need, maybe 11. But yeah, I've always been interested in building wealth rather than having a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, that's funny about the compound interest calculator, because that was one of those aha moments in my life, actually. I had a summer internship, I think in college. It was with Solomon Smith Barney, and I was doing grunt work, but one of the things I was able to sit in front of this compound interest calculator, and it was Roth IRAs. If you put in the max, which then was only like 2,000 or 3,000, I gamed it out. If I earn X percent a year until I'm 90, and it was like $100 million, and I'm just falling on the floor. It was insane. But as silly as that sounds, that was one of those seminal moments in my financial life. Just seeing that calculator and knowing that, holy cow, only $2,000 or $3,000 a year can make such a difference when compounded over many, many decades. So
right. My parents, my dad actually he had a dental practice, and he was just down the street from an E.D. Jones guy because, they're on every street corner. But he took us down there and had the guy run us through some little scenarios like that. And he showed us, if you put in, I think it was $2,000 a year, and we were probably 16 or 17 at the time. And he showed us 11% interest in what that would do over the course of a lifetime. And it was like, wow, yeah, there's those, decamillionaire numbers. So this is not a plug for E.D. Jones by any means, but he did open my eyes to the magic of compound interest. And my dad taught me the rule of 72 even before that. So I knew what it would take to double my money with interest.
Yeah, that's very cool. So I just want to actually ask you to put yourself in your shoes like the day before you read that Market Watch article with Mr. Money Mustache. So had you thought about retirement or early retirement or what it would take, what that number was for you? Like, had that ever consciously came into your mind, or what was your plan the day before you read that article?
That's a great question. And I would say that I hadn't thought a whole lot about it. I figured it made sense to work at least as long as I had kids going to school and living with us, which would have put me into my early to mid 50s. And I had kind of looked at the numbers and figured, if I worked till 60, I'd likely have 10 million, and maybe even by 55 if things continue to go well with the stock market. But the thing that really drove me to kind of look at all that again, and I think I stumbled across the Market Watch article, and then it just kind of stuck in a little place in the back of my mind. And then I was studying for a board exam, and it's one that they make us take every 10 years, or at least that was the plan back then. They've changed the rules. But I was studying for this exam, and it was just a whole bunch of minutia that I had to learn that didn't really apply to the job I do every day. And I thought, geez, I'm going to have to do this again in 10 years, like spend several months studying for this computer exam that costs $2,000 to take. And it's very frustrating. And then I thought, well, what did that Pete guy say again? What were the numbers there? I should look at that again. And that's how I found his blog and read a whole bunch of it, and then really honed in on what we had and figured out, nope, I don't have to take that test again in 10 years. I could probably get away with not taking it now. But it was all so new to me. It's taken a couple of years just to process it all. And then I started writing about it about a year after that aha moment.
Going back, one of the things that was really powerful to me that you said a second ago was basically saying, and I could have $13 million. And then I realized, wait a second, I don't actually need $13 million. In fact, that number may be close to it. Now, insert a number here. It doesn't really matter. But what's striking to me is that in the community that we're in, and I love that, yes, your domain is physician, but it's physician on fire. So you have centered yourself from the fire community, and your framework's different, but your roots are in fire. And that's the conversation that we have. Money is not the end goal. This is not a race to be the one with the biggest pot. But what you're doing is you're looking, all right, how much do I need to sustain the lifestyle that I want to be able to provide for my family? And that's a function of the math. And then you don't need to pick some willy-nilly, number out in the sky. It's not a pie in the sky. It's not 20 million. It's not 10 million. It's based on the math. And you said, my number one goal is to be financially independent, not to be the richest guy, not to be the next Warren Buffett. And my number is significantly less. And I think that's empowering. And I think that it really allows you to have a different conversation and a different motive with your working career.
Right. And it's still a big number that I'm shooting for, because I don't want to have any regrets. I don't want to feel like, gee, why did I leave this great job when I was in my early to mid 40s? And so I'm overshooting a bit, and I know that, but I'll be more comfortable with, say, a 3 to 3.5% withdrawal rate, and I'm aiming to have the ability to spend maybe 20 to 30% more than I actually do right now, because I do like most aspects of my job. There are certain parts of it that I don't love, but I'm trying to balance the regret of, say, working too many years and not starting to live a more exciting life early versus regret walking away too soon and someday wishing that I had worked longer. But yeah, as far as those big numbers, I mean, honestly, I figured I'd probably just put my name on a building at my alma mater or something like that someday. Although, with compound interest, and if I continue to spend the equivalent of less than $100,000 a year, and I worked till I was in my 60s, well, yeah, I would have 10 million when I retire, but maybe 50 million 30 years after that. And of course, that wouldn't be worth as much as it is today, but it would still buy, I think, at least a nice break room or something.
That's awesome. One of the things that's so unique about the situation that you find yourself in, being a physician, or I would say specifically with physicians, just because the amount of training that you guys have to go through to be a physician in the fire space, what a quandary. You are going to be in this situation where you spent 16 years trying to become a physician. And I'm not saying that this is the choice that you're going to make, but for someone it might be. They do it for 5 or 6 or 10 years, and suddenly they say, you know what, I think I'm pulling the trigger. I think I'm done. And I think I read this on maybe your blog or someone else's. Is there the potential for guilt there that you're making that choice? Would you feel guilty that, I think I'm going to get out of this?
Personally, no. I think some people have different thoughts on that, but we certainly didn't sign any kind of indentured servitude contract when we decided to become physicians. And so I don't think we necessarily owe anything to society. I think it's a good service that we provide, but we're also compensated for it. So it's more of a contract with society than a contribution, I feel sometimes. Unless you're truly doing volunteer work, then that's wonderful.
All right. So I want to ask a question. This is just my own ignorance of the profession. So let's say just hypothetically you were to take off a couple of years and you decided, hey, this early retirement stuff isn't for me. Could you go back to being a physician at that point, or do you need to requalify, or how would that even work? Is that something on your mind?
It definitely is on my mind. And when I do, quote unquote, retire from medicine, I'm going to treat it like a sabbatical, as though I may come back. At least I'll set myself up so that I could. And the longer you're away, the more difficult it will be. But for me, that to set myself up, that means having all of my certifications up to date and renewed just before leaving. So there are a number of acronymed certifications that I have to have as an anesthesiologist, and that's advanced cardiac life support, basic life support, pediatric advanced life support, etc. So I'll have all of those ready to go, and they're good for 2 years. And then I'll renew my state license, which most of them are good for 2 to 3 years. I'll probably do some basic CME, which is continuing medical education, attending conferences or doing certain online modules to get credit. So you do have to do quite a bit to keep just the paper certifications up to date. And then the other part of it is skills, and skills fade in time. And people like me, anesthesiologists, also surgeons, interventional radiologists, interventional cardiologists, we do a lot of procedures with our hands. And if you're away from medicine for too long, not doing those procedures, you're going to get rusty. And so, I think for me, that window will be closed within a year or two. And if I really wanted to come back after 5 or 8 years, something like that, it's possible, but it would definitely require some remediation. And I would probably need to work with a residency program and do some sort of maybe a 1 year or a 6-month remedial training just to make sure that I have the skills. And then it's going to be up to your employer, the place that might hire you, whether they find that's adequate or not.
So one of the things we talk about with FI in general is kind of taking the control back from someone else, right? So your employer or whoever it is, things you don't like to do. And one thing you mentioned a few minutes ago really struck me, where you said there are many aspects of your job that you really genuinely enjoy. Are there any, is there any capability to just do those aspects? And as Jim Collins would say, when you have FU money, you can say FU to the aspects that you don't like. I mean, is that conceivable in the medical profession? Like, is that something that you've thought of, or is it you really just want to just say, okay, I'm really retired?
There are definitely ways that you can make your life better as a physician, and it depends on the specialty. For me, I think the number one thing I could do would be to not work overnight call and not carry a pager for 72 or 96 hours at a time, which I do quite frequently. And so there are outpatient surgical centers where you can work only there. Of course, you take a good pay cut to do it. But again, if you don't need the money, that's one great way to make your life better. If you're a surgeon and you only like doing certain procedures, well, you may be able to find a position where you're only doing the procedures that you want to be doing. In anesthesia specifically, for me, you don't have as much autonomy. You kind of need to be where you're needed. And so when a woman is going to have a baby, it's a wonderful thing, but she needs her epidural at 2 a.m. So that's where you need to be. And when the surgeon's ready to do a case, whether it's scheduled or emergency, well, you need to be there when he's ready to cut. So I don't have as much autonomy as some other physicians to design the exact kind of practice that I might want, but I can do certain things, and I'm going to go part-time this fall. So I'll be working 40% less, and I think that'll be a nice balance and a nice transition into perhaps working 0% time.
What's interesting about being in such a high marginal tax bracket is just because you're working 40% less does not mean that you're making 40% less.
Absolutely, yeah. And I wrote a post not long ago called So Long Full-Time Employment, and I just highlighted how much less I make for that last 40% that I work on a per shift basis, like basically a 12-hour shift. It's not quite how we work, but kind of like that. I make $500 more in the first 10 shifts of the month than I do in the last 6, because the taxes, half of what I earn goes to taxes in those last shifts, and it only about a quarter goes to taxes in the first 10, on average. Remarkable.
Yeah, it really is. And it definitely has to change the structure that you're creating as you're creating your own FI plan or FIRE plan. That has to be part of the calculus.
Right. And I didn't, of course, I know the tax code pretty well, but I didn't realize just how much less I would be compensated for that extra work. And I used to pick up extra work. I used to do a lot of locums even on my time off, just because like I said, I was interested in creating wealth and paying off our debt, getting rid of the mortgage and getting rid of student loans and all that. I worked hard to make it happen, but I definitely paid plenty of taxes in.
So this is really powerful. So let's say you're talking to your peers and you're just having this conversation about how to completely transform your life and your framework. And the question is, should I focus on earning more, picking up extra shifts, or should I work on cutting my lifestyle? And you can make that case in any tax bracket. I think it's a great conversation to have. But when you're in a 40% or 50%, essentially after all your taxes taxes are paid. That conversation, it's an extremely dramatic conversation to have when you take a look at one. Yes, you could go sacrifice every single weekend. You could be on call around the clock, but you are only going to be bringing home an extra small percentage. Where if instead of that, you made this one choice, you bailed on this one line item, you're going to be recapturing 100% of that and putting it towards your ultimate goal, which is to buy your freedom.
Right. A dollar saved is $2 earned when you're at the 50%, marginal tax bracket, which can happen in high tax states. So absolutely focus on the big things, the home, the cars, even vacations. And we take lots of vacations. And our most recent one was to Paris and Iceland, Reykjavik, with our kids. But we went there because we found a good deal on a flight. It was $400 round trip each. And so, yeah, you could spend 15, 20 grand on a family vacation to Europe, but we spent less than $5.
So speaking of family, talk us through what does your wife think about this FI plan or FI in general? And what, if anything, do your friends and family think? If you've spoken to them about it, or do you mention the blog to anybody? Just give us some background on all this information, like in your real life, how FI impacts your relationships.
Of course. Yeah, my wife is definitely on board. I think that she is excited. And I recorded a different podcast recently with the White Coat Investor, and he asked, doesn't your spouse deserve a really great lifestyle? And I said, well, yes, and she'll have one, but she deserves my time more than anything at this point. She basically single parents when I am on call, which is in the past every third night. Now it's every fifth on average. And so I think she deserves my time for her and for our family, more than more money. So she's excited about some of the plans that we've talked about, which include taking an RV around the country, living in a Spanish-speaking country, spending months at a time in faraway places like New Zealand or Australia or Southeast Asia, Europe, etc. So no, she would not be upset if I quit my job tomorrow. As far as friends and family, my parents are definitely on board. I didn't tell them about the blog for about a year, and along with that, I told them about our early retirement plans, and yeah, they totally get it. They know that it's a high-stress job, and they know that I'm not a spendthrift, and we know what we need, and we know what we're doing. So they're definitely on board too.
It's interesting how a lot of your plans for the future are actually things that I've seen other people in the FI community model. Like JD Roth is traveling around in an RV, and Chad Carson from Coach Carson is living in a Spanish-speaking country. Him and his wife had that exact same conversation. Or Jeremy and Winnie from Go Curry Cracker are living abroad for months at a time. So that's got to be kind of cool to actually see people in your community, whether you know them personally or not, but in your community do that and see how they describe it literally on their blog.
Right. On one hand, I'm terribly unoriginal because, like you say, this is just other people's ideas, not mine. But I do have the benefit of seeing how it works in reality and being able to read all about it, and then having those contacts that I could reach out to and be like, hey, I'm going to do this too. Any thoughts? Any tips? I don't know. Everything's been done before, I think.
We come back to that Jim Rohn quote, you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. We keep bringing it up, but those ideas, yes, they're not unique, but because you spend time or have spent time, capturing their ideas, trying to figure out if that's something that's feasible for you guys, those suddenly become very normal, reasonable ideas. If the 5 people in your world, if all of your influences were just get the private school, get the 2 new cars, drive the Maserati, right, get the biggest house you can afford, join the country club, get the golf membership, that's where all your energies are. And that's going to trap you in that lifestyle. And I love the choices that you're making.
Yeah, thanks. And that kind of reminds me of, I kind of alluded to it earlier that where I live, that's not the norm, which is really great. There's not as much peer pressure. But, in medicine, we have this geographic arbitrage, I call it, where the highest paying jobs tend to be in the places where there's less demand for people to live. So on the coasts, in the big cities, that's where the action is. That's where people want to be. They make less money. Whereas in most professions, bankers, lawyers tend to be more well paid in those big cities. And in a lot of professions, you have to live in maybe 6 or 10 different places if you really want the best jobs. Whereas in medicine, if you live in a small town in the heartland, you're probably going to not only make more money, but also spend a whole lot less and have very little pressure because you can be a big fish in a small pond on a very modest lifestyle.
Yeah, so that's actually a perfect segue for what I wanted to talk about next, which is strategies for high earners. And what do you suggest for people who are pursuing FI? Like, are there specific hacks or strategies that you recommend for other high-income earners?
Well, we've certainly talked quite a bit about our marginal tax bracket being high. So you want to do everything you can to lower your taxable income And so I recommend filling up every tax deferred bucket that you can. Even if you have a Roth option, it may not make the most sense when you're paying 40% or more on every last dollar you earn. So for me, that means maxing out a 401k, a 457b, and an HSA every year. If you're in a self-employed situation, you may have a solo 401k or maybe a SEP IRA. There are other avenues where you can still put away about $50,000 or more per year tax deductible. After that, I think a taxable account is also, it's a bad name, but it's a great account. If you keep your funds in it in low dividend funds, it actually can act fairly similar to a Roth, particularly if you retire without a ton of income in those retirement years. You can take money out of that without paying taxes as long as you stay in that lower 15% tax bracket. Now, that all depends on how our tax code changes over the years, but I'm planning on paying very little in taxes once I'm done.
Great. That's a great summary. In fact, we've actually covered a lot of those topics one by one, and I think you just pieced it together, in I think a pretty easy to understand way. So one of the things that I know a lot of high income earners look at, in fact, there's some concerns that maybe down the road it may not be there, is the backdoor Roth. Do you want to unpack that idea for us?
Sure. I've been doing the quote-unquote backdoor Roth for 4 or 5 years. And what that is a way to get some money into a Roth IRA for people that earn too much to be eligible to contribute directly. And for couples that are married filed jointly, I believe the cutoff is about $180,000 or $190,000. And so once you're above that, MAGI, I think it is, then you have to look at a non-traditional way of doing it, which is by making a non-deductible contribution to an IRA and then subsequently converting that to Roth IRA. So you accomplish the same thing as a direct Roth IRA contribution, which you're not allowed to do, but by doing it in 2 steps. And so that's why they call it the backdoor. And as you mentioned, that could go away at any time. So I always take advantage of that right away in January every year. And you can do it for yourself and you can do it for your spouse, even if your spouse doesn't earn an income, because you can just sort of spousal IRA.
And so how much money are you able to then get rolled over into it?
So each year it's $5,500 each, so $11,000. And it'll be Roth money, and it's really in lieu of additional taxable investing. So basically, I'm replacing $11,000 that would have gone into my taxable accounts for the year and making it Roth money instead.
That $5,500 each year that ultimately ends up in the Roth, does that count as a contribution to the Roth? Like, does it have the same character as a traditional contribution where you can pull it out tax and penalty free at any time if you so choose?
It's a conversion. So I believe those need to be seasoned for 5 years.
Okay.
So that would be kind of the Roth ladder idea.
Now, one of the things that I see you talk about on your blog, and I like it, is that you discuss the implications of financial freedom versus financial independence. Specifically, there's some margin between those two. Would you like to talk to our audience for a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. And I think those terms are used interchangeably quite a bit. But for me, I kind of focused in on financial independence. It's 25 years of expenses. That is the definition. And freedom to me sounds like you have more, you have more freedom to do the things you might want to do. And so I kind of took it and looked at our annual spending, which was about $70,000. And I looked and I figured about $40,000 was our core expenses, and $30,000 of it was money that we choose to spend, that we're doing fun things with or optional things with. It's not food, shelter, utilities, etc. And so I said, well, if we took that $30,000 and doubled it, which would be really big lifestyle inflation. It would be more trips to Europe and Australia and opting for the steak every time you go to dinner, that sort of thing. It would be a really big upgrade. But I guess that's how I would look at financial freedom. You need to be a little bit careful with the whole hedonic treadmill concept. But for me, I looked at our $70,000 annual budget as financial independence. And when you double the $30,000 discretionary, you get $60,000, and that would be $100,000. And I took 25 times that to be our financial freedom number. And it ended up being about, I think, 36 times our annual spending as opposed to 25. But yeah, I think the concept, and for me, I'm just trying to kind of figure out when is the best time to retire. Like, I don't want to retire and just say, okay, we've locked in this lifestyle. This is where we're going to be, unless we get lucky in the market.
Right.
As long as I enjoy my job, and I'm awfully young, in the terms of physician. I've only been doing this it's 11 years now. I can give it a couple more years and buy us a little more freedom to make the choices that we might not be making now. Maybe we don't want to be as frugal when we're 45 or 50, or maybe our kids eat 5 times as much when they're teenagers, which I hear they tend to do.
Yeah, it's coming your way, man. There's a couple of things that really stand out to me there. One, I think so many people say, well, this isn't what my life costs, but don't put the necessary effort in to determine what are their core expenses and how much of that, I like the word fluff. Fluff can be whatever you want. You make the value choice for it, but it's important just to track it and know how much is core, how much is to keep the lights on to make sure my family can survive, and then how much of that is fluff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And yeah, we have quite a bit of fluff already, but I don't know. We might want to add some, and I want to make sure that we have the money there to do it if we choose to. And if not, that's great. That's more money for charity or whatnot down the line.
The other thing that strikes me is just how far that goes. I mean, you guys don't have a mortgage. You don't have a car payments. You don't have any debt. So, and I'm contrasting this with a person that makes $100,000 a year, but they have all of that. They can afford the payments, but there's nothing left. There's nothing left, and they're going to be on that hamster wheel for life. So your core expenses, you could bring that back if you wanted to, if you really absolutely had to, but your core expenses are one level, and then you could have 60 grand in discretionary spending, which takes you up to 100. But because that essentially for a joint filing couple, that's the end of the 15% marginal tax bracket. If you have $100,000 a year, that's what we're going to live on, and you have no debt, nothing, you are going to live like the billionaires of yesteryear, and you get to make the choice to do whatever you want, but it just gives you so much freedom with the tax code.
Right. Yeah. There's a huge difference between, salary and spending. I think the happiness studies that said you don't get much more bang for your buck after about $75,000 a year, and they were actually looking at income. But if you can spend $75,000 a year, that's a lot of money to spend once you subtract all of the payments and the debts and all of that.
Yeah, and that strikes me as a very conservative number, how you've set this entire financial freedom up, right? So if you're saying it's $40K a year are your core expenses, but you're ultimately budgeting, if you will, for $100K of expenses. I mean, that sounds like this wonderful lifestyle. So yeah, I'm very impressed by that.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll go all the way up to that 100,000, but just having enough of a nest egg to allow for it makes me feel pretty good. And I don't know if I would feel good if I was spending all 100,000 of it. Probably not. But just to know that would be there, and I could be within at least the 4% withdrawal rate there.
That comes back to the withdrawal rate. People freak out about whether or not the number is 3% or 4%. But when you have this margin, you're able to do the math that tells you what's the margin that you should be working within. And you can pick and choose based on the whims of the market. But either way, you guys are going to be fine.
Yeah, and then when half or more of it's fluff, like you say, if we do hit a really bad bear market, another 2000 or 2008 style pullback, well, we can also pull back our lifestyle pretty easily. In fact, we may very well end up. Right now, we have 2 homes. Our second home is just a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath, sort of a old resort unit that's now called a condo, but we call it our cabin. That might be our only property for a while. If we're traveling most of the year, then that could be home base, and we'll have far fewer expenses for our homes.
Very cool. Lots of latitude.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really amazing about what you're doing is your donor advised fund. I know that you actually donate 50% of the profit that you make from your blog to different charities. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I started this blog after I had reached financial independence, and so when I started to monetize, which I think I did on the second or third day, even though I said I wasn't going to do it for a year, I thought it made sense to make sure at least some of that money was doing some good. So I decided to make a pledge to donate half of my profits to charities. And I do a lot of that via a donor advised fund, which is a great way to get the most money to charity from your own dollars. So I donate mutual funds that have appreciated that would have capital gains if I sold them, but instead I donate them and the charity will get the full amount of money. And the donor advised fund is kind of a place for that money to go as an intermediary, and it can sit there for as long as you like and then be distributed to charities from the donor advised fund. But yeah, as far as donating half the profits, it just feels right. It didn't make a lot of sense for me to say, hey, I'm financially independent, and oh, by the way, the right sidebar is going to be full of ads, and I'm going to have affiliate links, and I'm going to make even more money. And I do hope to make some money from it because I like to have some skin in the game myself. It helps me really have a reason to try to make it the best that I can make it, but also to have a charitable mission. And hopefully I'll be able to give tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars away from the income that the blog may provide.
That's pretty cool. And that's the first time I've actually seen anybody do that or talk about something like that, at least in the FI blog sphere. So we'll definitely link to that article in the show notes for this episode as well. Very, very, very cool stuff.
Awesome.
All right, guys. And now it's time for the hot seat.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
It's the hot seat.
Yeah, that's right.
I feel it. I'm in a chair on fire, physician on fire, and a chair on fire.
Nice.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
I am going to go with, and I have already mentioned earlier in our talk, a couple that I really like, which are Mr. Money Mustache and the White Coat Investor. But I'm going to go with 1500days.com. Every time I read his posts, I laugh. And there's also usually a little bit of a deep thought in there somewhere, hidden amongst the fart jokes and dinosaurs that
I was just going to say
1500 adores.
A little piece of me is honestly jealous of the dinosaur toys that he still has. Those are some seriously cool dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm, indeed.
Question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this can be one that you wrote, or you could point toward one that somebody else wrote. Either way.
Okay. Yeah, I know you're going to link to a bunch of my stuff, so I'm not worried about that. All time would probably be the Market Watch article about Mr. Money Mustache, which was entitled How to Retire Early, 35 Years Early. But more recently, one I really liked came from Justin at rootofgood.com, and he wrote an article entitled Living a $100,000 Lifestyle on $40,000 per year, which really speaks to how good your lifestyle can be once you eliminate so many of the typical expenses that people have, which include income taxes and mortgage payments and student loan payments and all of those other things. Add in a little travel hacking, and you can live really quite well on a modest income. For him, it's $40,000. For me, it's closer to 60 or 70.
Yeah, that's really cool. And one other item that usually doesn't even get factored in is savings, right? So if you were making $100,000 a year, obviously to get to FI, you're not only paying income taxes, but you're saving a significant amount of that money. So whereas, I always get caught up with the retirement calculators you'll see on fidelity.com or something like that. And they just look at your current income. But that's just such right. That's such an odd way of looking at it, because savings, by definition, to get to retirement at some point in the future, you have to be saving currently. And they never even look at that. They don't look at taxes. Like you mentioned, then obviously you're not going to have a mortgage. You're not going to have all these other things. It's such a silly, reverse way of looking at retirement. And I think people in the FI community have really hit it on the head of it's all about the expenses.
Right. And the assumption in those calculators is that you're spending most of your income. And sadly, that calculator does work for better than 90% of the population, because we are, for the most part, living paycheck to paycheck. And the savings rate nationally is about 5%, which, as you know, having looked at the math, that's not going to get you to FI before you're eligible for Social Security. So, yeah, and sadly, that does work for most people, but it makes no sense for anyone who's saving more than even 10 or 15% of their income.
Yeah, that's great insight.
All right, number 3, your favorite life hack.
I mentioned this earlier, and it's somewhat specific to my field, but geographic arbitrage. So I live in the upper Midwest in a fairly small town, and I'm compensated well. I'm make a bit more than the average for my specialty even. And the cost of living is much, much lower than it would be living on the coast, living in a big city. So if I lived in a low tax state, which I have before, that would be even bigger arbitrage. But you can save an extra, many tens of $1,000s a year, even hundreds of thousands, or 100,000 maybe, for a physician living in the heartland versus living in San Francisco or New York.
Wow. All right. Question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
Again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but we built our dream home back when I landed my first quote-unquote permanent job and thought we'd be there forever. It's really only a mistake in hindsight, but when we did sell the place after having tried to rent it out a couple different ways for several years, we ended up taking a loss of about $200,000 plus realtor fees. So that was a pretty big hit.
Yeah, that hurts. It hurts. Sounds like you guys have bounced back from it, though.
Yeah, I think we have.
All right, the advice you would give your younger self.
I wouldn't have bought that house. And I was going to say something along the lines of discover financial independence early on. But actually, I almost feel bad for some of the physicians who maybe have found a site like mine or many of the other fire blogs early on, because it's tough if you decide you're going to make that your goal. And then for 10, 15 years, that's what you're focused on. I feel really fortunate to kind of have stumbled into it. And now I think it's better to know about it and save diligently than to live paycheck to paycheck for 20 years and then realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, I don't know if I would tell myself, because I made the right decisions along the way anyway.
If possible, and I don't know if you have more to add to that, but I think it's worth highlighting just for a second. I'm just thinking that people do stumble onto your site, and they do stumble onto our podcast, and they're in medical school or some, medical profession, and they're on this path. So maybe they're a resident, or maybe they're a student, and they're just now getting to the point where they realize the implications of incurring the $200,000 or $300,000 in debt they're going to get. What advice would you have for that person?
I would focus on the big numbers and make sure you do have some fun along the way, because I guess that's my concern. If I told my younger self to pursue FI, that I would have maybe chosen not to go to the Galapagos Islands when I was unemployed between jobs, or not honeymooned in Alaska, and not made some of the choices that, although they cost us a little bit of money, we certainly could afford them and pursued FI at the same time. So I guess my recommendation is don't buy the most house you can afford. Don't have 2 car payments for fancy vehicles that you just don't need, and spend some money on having some fun. And it's a cliche, but spend money on experiences, not things, and then focus on eliminating those debts and not taking on large new ones.
Cool. I think that's good stuff. All right. We got a bonus question for you. Your favorite purchase made on Amazon.com last year, or if not Amazon, your favorite purchase in general?
Amazon. So I looked through my orders here recently, and that was eye-opening. We've purchased a lot of Legos over the last year. Not only for our boys, but of course they go to a birthday party about once a month. And so it took me a while to actually page through and find just what I wanted to choose here. But I bought the Amazon Tap, which is the push-button activated portable Bluetooth speaker that hooks up to internet. And it does a lot of other fun things too. It's a smaller version of the Echo, which my parents have. And I bought that on Black Friday when it was down to $89.99. From the normal $129. So that was my favorite purchase. And although there are times when I kind of wish it had the voice activated feature, my parents have it, like I said. And when my kids are there, they just yell at it all day long. They say, Alexa, tell me a joke. Alexa, do this. Alexa, do that. And it gets to be obnoxious. So the fact that you have to actually push the button before you talk to it is actually a good feature, in my opinion.
That's cool. So the main difference between the Echo and the Tap is just literally that you have to tap this thing?
Yeah, rather than saying Alexa to get its attention, you tap it.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it.
That's the only difference. Well, that's the main difference. But also the Tap is portable, so you can take it with you outside or into the garage, or you don't have to plug it in. It's got a battery.
We are so far past Big Brother now. Like, it's not even funny. Like, I was just watching, what was that movie with Will Smith back in the day? Enemy of the State, right? And I think they had like a couple cameras somewhere else compared to now, man. So I would probably get it too, but it is funny. This has been great. I think a lot of our audience is going to find this useful. I think that you speak to a very specific bracket. I think everybody can relate to your message, but there are definitely high income earners that are interested in how they can optimize their finances. And I think you're doing a great job modeling it for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So how can people connect with you?
Well, the easiest way is just to visit my website, which is physicianonfire.com. It's PHYSICIAN on fire. The only reason I spell it is because I do see every day the different searches that come to my site, and there are about 4 or 5 different misspellings or typo versions of physician. And so the website's the best way. Also, I'm pretty active on Twitter, and my handle is just @physicianonfire. So that's probably the best 2 ways. And I've got an email subscription you can sign up, and that's really easy to do from the website as well.
All right, guys, we're wrapping this thing up, and I love the story that Physician on Fire told. I know how easy it is to relate to that message. And to me, what's so striking is when you build a FI framework, it doesn't matter what tax bracket you're in. High income earners, this story is still for you too. There's room for you here. And you have this advantage of this high income. What are you going to do with it? Don't waste the opportunity. Get control of your life now. And I love the tools that Physician on Fire took the time to tell us about. And I hope that you find it useful as you continue to build your own personal FI framework. Brad, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the entire FI journey always comes down to getting your lifestyle under control. And Physician on Fire's lifestyle might be significantly more expensive than many people pursuing FI, but based on his income, that's plausible, and it's still allowing him this very abbreviated path towards financial freedom and financial independence.
Friends, the fire is spreading, and we'll see you next week as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.